Hello, everyone. This is Gretchen Vogel. I want to share with you a conversation that I had with Joseph Campbell in the world of spirit. If you don't know who Joseph Campbell is, please Google him with the word myth or mythology. He was one of the great thinkers of our time. He had some wonderful things to share with us. When I reached him in meditation, I went to a slightly higher plane and in a deeper trance so I could hear him. But he was lovely and casual and welcoming to me. So let's begin. Joseph says, "You have to allow yourself to experience divinity. It's potentially possible in any walking, waking moment of your life. You can experience divinity. It is not dependent on going somewhere or following certain rules. Experiencing the divinity within yourself is not dependent on doing anything that anyone else may do. And what is so difficult is when somebody meets somebody who has achieved rapture, then you want to follow their rules. You want to do the activity that they did, whether it's going to the top of the mountain and fasting in a cave or being locked in a dungeon for 40 days. I mean, you can achieve rapture anywhere. But then when others see that somebody has achieved rapture under certain circumstances, there tends to be a following. And of course, that's how most of our religions got started. You had a very saintly person who was walking in the knowledge of their own divinity. And other people obviously recognized this in the saints. And so they mimicked or followed the rules that were constructed, most times not by the saint, but by those around the saint. For example, take martyrdom as a way of achieving rapture. Certainly, if you're being tortured to the point that your body goes into shock, you are going to have an out-of-body experience. 90% of the people in the world would leave their body by choice gladly, but would not necessarily be dead. Some would remember this, some would not. But a martyr who was being tortured in the olden days would certainly have an out-of-body experience and achieve the rapture of, well, this rapture, this achievement might be reflected in their physical countenance. And then others would look at their face and say, look at that person being tortured, and they are achieving rapture or bliss or unity with the divine. And then they would say, well, that's the way to achieve it. And there are many self-flagellatory sects that came out of that practice. Sometimes it is helpful to look at how others achieve their rapture, but a truly thinking and feeling person would find their own path to self-awareness, to their own divinity. And now this does become harder to do with the complexities of the world around you. And the more knowledgeable and the more sensitive you become, the more you have to work on focusing on the activities that produce and foster rapture for and within you. Now, for example, you and I are very different where our attitude toward the human species is concerned. I find a lot to be rapturous with about the human mind. I am stimulated by what others have thought, written, and felt, and I see divinity in that. But that's not your path to divinity. Your path to divinity is very much through the natural elements, even more elemental than you would think of with your pets and animals and plants, which are fairly complex compilations of these elements. Your experience of divinity is just in the texture and the smells of the reality on your planet. He continues, for example, for me, it is so intriguing that you are able to do this. For me, meeting someone out here in the greater realms, who is able to converse with me. I'm deceased. I'm out of a body. But you're with me. That fascinates me. Your mind fires me up. Your mind intrigues me that you are able to do this. Yes, I focus mostly on people, but in people who were striving to be excellent, as many of the native peoples are, because they don't get distracted and bogged down and weighed down by the influence of a complex modern life, or by the influence of others to disregard the excellence of their own self. Indeed, it is in the excellence of the self that the divinity lays, that puts you in touch with your own divine nature, to relish in and practice being the very best you can, that will always break through the barriers to the understanding and the knowledge of your own divinity, which is your excellence, in whatever way you are meant to express divinity. And I asked Joe, how did you relate to God? He says, I found God everywhere I looked. Once you tune in to what is divine, there is so much divinity here that you never have to look beyond the planet itself. There is divinity in the most simple person trying to be the best they can. There is divinity in the sacrifice of motherhood, in the excellence of giving your life over and your mental, physical, and emotional faculties to a completely separate other life. There is divinity in the Father, the nurturer, the provider, the protector, inasmuch as it is done with excellence. And this was what was in the Holy Grail, this striving for excellence. So many of the myths and pageants were about not necessarily achieving the act, the end, because in striving for excellence, the excellence exists. The excellence is not diminished by the conditions we place on how to define excellence. It is the trying, it is the striving, the exercising of yourself to your highest capacity. That is the achievement. That is the excellence. And that is the divinity in you. And so to not try equals waste. And waste, as you know it, equals evil. It is a misuse of the available energy, of which time is an energy pattern. And so to strive for less than excellence. And this doesn't mean that you're a hamster in a cage just running and running. Excellence can be achieved in pure pleasure if it is your time to rest and relax and enjoy. If you are sitting and truly in your present, enjoying and taking pleasure in your rest, that is a striving for excellence. And so the word excel is closely related to the word excellence. But too often we see society's reward systems, their only evaluation of excellence being primarily monetary. But it's in the trying, the expressing of excellence, no matter what the end is. In this is where our divinity lays. I ask Joe, I have to ask you about prayer. I've been told it has to do with an energy transfer, but this seems so passive. And he said, if you stand on a rock near the ocean and watch the light on the water and be completely where you are in eternity. You have experienced this. That is prayer. That is the achieving of eternity. That is heaven. You are there. Eternity is not time. Eternity has nothing to do with time. Eternity cannot even be described as being eternal because it is not. Eternity is a state of being. He says there are certain rituals that you set up to get yourself into the state of mind where you can achieve this work. Some ritualistic prayers are trigger points for a certain state, like the Psalms or saying the Rosary. They are a key to opening up certain parts of the mind. They work for some people and they don't work for others. You are much more the type who can achieve eternity by experiencing sunshine and wind and the sounds of nature. But to many people, nature is a very alien concept in their lives. They would worry about the bugs. I asked Job, can you still feel eternity there? He says yes, from time to time, but it has to do with the memory of feeling unity in a body, because you don't feel things the same way out here. The feeling of achieving divinity in a body is different from feeling your divinity when not in a body. The range of feeling and experience is completely different. I experience divinity looking or turning my thoughts and attention towards Source, the source of all radiance, the source of all energy. At least in our experience so far, this is the source for us. And I experience it new and fresh here. But that's not the only place I want to turn my attention to yet. I could ascend now. I could focus on that radiance and will myself to be in complete unity with it. And that would be a true losing of myself in the sense that some of the religions speak of. And it would not just be the loss of the ego, not just the loss of earthly concerns, not just the loss of vanity, but the complete loss of self-knowledge, of self-knowingness. Because when one is re-merged with God or Source, there is no self-knowingness possible. It's the complete loss of self. But then, of course, to be completely and totally divine, you see, that separation, the Garden of Eden, of original sin, comes in the knowing that the self is outside of God's source. Otherwise, when one is merged and completely selfless, having no self-knowledge, united with and merged in God, there is no separation possible. No separation evident. It just doesn't exist. There is more that I want to do, so I will turn back at some point toward the human experience. He's saying now that he had such a great life. He's saying he really wasn't handicapped. His parents were kind and treated him with love. He didn't have many dragons to slay. My understanding grew when I studied Native Americans. I was able to meet and speak with some very great shamans. And I realized then that the Catholic Church was a ritual, even though the church says as much. I mean, the Mass is called the ritual of the Mass. You kind of skip over that word. You don't see what it's saying. As soon as I experienced the shamanic rituals, then I understood why they call the Mass a ritual. And then that fell away from me, in that I understood what its value was. For a while in my adulthood, I still participated in the church because of what the ritual offered me. There's nothing wrong with participating in any ritual that evokes transcendence or knowledge of the self-divinity. So there is nothing wrong with any ritual or anyone's religion. There are no rules. There are no rules to any of it, except the physical laws that you are in. But in experiencing divinity, there are no rules about how to do it. It's not just creativity. It's not just artisticness. Any act pursued with a level of excellence is an expression of divinity. And I have to reiterate, excellence not as a judgment of what anyone else would consider excellence. Excellence more in the tonal sense of striving or trying, or the effort of the energy put into it. So on the one hand, you have the everyday activities of bringing as much excellence you can into whatever you pursue in your action. On the other hand, you have another exercise of simply being in the eternal. And life is a combination of these two. Certainly, physical life implies action in a practical sense. Life is not just about being or experiencing the eternal. That is hard to achieve while your mind is on something else. Yes, you can practice experiencing the eternal as a pathway to the knowledge. You have to get away from your concept of religion as a barter, a scorekeeping, or as a judgmental faculty, and try to get your mind around the idea of just being, just living, just doing what you can do, doing the best you can. Of course, choosing what you're going to do. You see, the ritual evoked the divine experience, but it also had its sub-rules and regulations. He's talking about religion here. That experience of the divine is even more important in a power sense to control the lives of many. That it did seem like you actually ended up praying when you went into the church to experience the divine. But each of us has the power and ability to achieve divinity by yourself. When you are praying, just try to be there in that moment. Just try to experience the eternal a little bit. Try and be empty and calm. You see, it takes some people repetition of certain acts to console themselves that they are exercising these aspects of themselves. You cannot compare your experience of reality to anyone else, even though that's a very instinctual thing to do for survival in humans. But since we're very mentally oriented as a species, we tend to compare ourselves mentally. So when you see someone more at peace with themselves than you are, he or she is doing things in a certain way. It's just like watching a martyr being tortured. You might achieve transcendence through being tortured, and you might achieve transcendence through prayer or mantra. But that's not your path to transcendence or divinity. You're wallowing in divinity of your own. You don't need anyone else's path. You have all you need. You shouldn't look at achievement of divinity as being the one way, the correct path. Just because you admire me and you understand the state of mind that I reached toward the end. Because I did follow Joseph Campbell's work for a lot of my life. He said, believe me, there were a lot of days when I got up, went and did my teaching, came home, had a drink, and went to sleep. I had many dark days. Not every day was in the light. Not every day was in excellence. I tried more than I didn't try. But sometimes during life, it's just too much effort. And then you do just let the days go by and wait until you are recharged, or the weather changes, or you're on vacation, or something encourages you. So you can only be as excellent as much as you can. But it's more acknowledging your own excellence, finding and identifying the excellence in yourself that points the way toward your own divinity. It's more identifying the excellence of your reality, which will lead to the understanding of divinity. And yes, it's in all of us. And no, it's not a person, but yet it's as accessible as the metaphors tell us it is. It's right there for us to touch with our experience of the eternal and our experience of the total and complete here and now.